video game industry has changed drastically over the years, thanks to advances in online capabilities, motion controls, and VR. However, bosses have been a consistent staple in the industry since 1975's D&D. Yes, video game bosses really are that old. Bosses are tailored to put up one hell of a fight, making it all the more satisfying after the player topples a tyrant, slays a dragon, or kills a god. But there are times where so much effort is put into the boss's design and presentation, the creators neglected to work on the whole boss part. Even if the encounter provides a hefty challenge, it's not enjoyable if the antagonist relies on cheap and lazy tactics. And if the bout is an absolute slog, gamers will be bored to tears from start to finish. These 10 bosses may have looked badass, but the actual confrontation was a total letdown. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 incredible looking video game bosses that sucked to fight. Number 10. ALDUIN, The Elder Scrolls Skyrim. 10 minutes into Skyrim, the player comes face to face with the mightiest of dragons, ALDUIN. The towering wyvern makes an immediate impression as he burns everything in his vicinity to ash. He's the bane of kings, the eater of worlds. He used to rule Skyrim, and he's a god that can defy death. Also, he can time travel. After being built up for over 40 hours, it felt like the showdown with ALDUIN couldn't live up to expectations. Sadly, that's exactly what happened. This late in the game, the protagonist will be staggeringly overpowered, allowing them to annihilate ALDUIN with very little effort. Annoyingly, the final skirmish is a walk in the park, even if the player doesn't take major precautions, using counterspells, healing spells, poisoning weapons, etc. But the battle isn't just bad because it's easy, it's painfully generic. There's nothing distinctive about ALDUIN's plan of attack that makes him stand out from other dragon battles. Skyrim has a deluge of memorable moments, but the final boss isn't one of them. Number 9. Helice, Horizon Zero Dawn. Although Hades is the final boss in Horizon Zero Dawn, this guy feels like the primary antagonist since he's bothered Aloy and hindered her journey more than anybody else. Because he's been at our heroine's heels every step of the way, the player is eager to face the devious despot in one-on-one combat. And considering Horizon Zero Dawn's Cyber Beast boss fights are astoundingly innovative, gamers were certain the battle with the Eclipse Leader would be a showstopper. Sadly, Aloy's bout with Helice is insultingly dull. Rather than rely on a doomsday weapon or a creative combat technique, he wails on Aloy with basic melee attacks. Save for his huge health bar, there's very little to differentiate him from any other basic enemy. What's worse is the fight itself is way too long. He receives reduced damage from explosions and is immune to silent strikes and critical hits, purely to drag out this mundane brawl as long as possible. Because the player hates Helice's guts, they should be looking forward to tearing him a new one, but due to his overly simple combat mechanics, the whole experience is lackluster. Number 8. ONAGA, Mortal Kombat Deception. For the longest time, we believed Shao Kahn was the ultimate baddie in Mortal Kombat, so it was a bit of a surprise when we found out he reported into somebody in Deception, and that guy was ONAGA. In the prologue, the self-proclaimed Dragon King showcases his power by easily withstanding the combined might of Raiden, Shang Tsung, and Quan Chi. After seeing this awesome intro, anyone would imagine ONAGA was the most powerful combatant in the MK tournament by far. And yet the final battle with this cosmic beast is laughably underwhelming. Rather than performing devastating special moves and combos, ONAGA uses generic attacks like Fireball, Shockwave, and Sliding Kick. Dude, you're a dragon, why aren't you eating your opponent's face off? What's worse is ONAGA's arena is surrounded by energy-sapping artifacts called Kamidogu. If the player touches these ornaments, ONAGA becomes dazed, giving his rival a chance to batter him. This begs the question, why did the Dark Emperor decorate his room with the one thing he's vulnerable to? Because of this illogical setup, the player doesn't even really need to rely on skill. Instead, they can grab a Kamidogu, beat ONAGA to a pulp while he's stunned, and then rinse and repeat until he's dead. Number 7. Killer Croc, Batman Arkham Asylum. Batman Arkham Asylum opens with the Dark Knight escorting Joker to his cell. As he's on his way through the facility, he has a run-in with Killer Croc. When Croc alerts Batman he can find him now he has the Caped Crusader's scent, the player knows the pair are going to throw down at some point. And when Batman reaches the sewer later in the game, the battle between the two seems inevitable. Once the carnivorous reptile bursts from the waters and charges at the cowed detective, the boss fight is officially underway. Or so it seems. After tossing a batarang at Croc, the monstrous supervillain falls into the water. Of course, Croc comes back every now and then, but it's not such a big deal since he can be subdued the same way every time. Although Arkham Asylum has some ropey bosses, Killer Croc had no excuse. The guy isn't a thug or a whimsical supervillain, he's a man-eating dinosaur. And yet Croc poses such a minor threat, it's hard to classify this encounter as a fight. Since he only appears for a few seconds here and there, this is sort of more of a boss nuisance than a boss battle. Number 6. The CYBERDEMON, Doom 3. In Doom lore, the CYBERDEMON is regarded as the toughest denizen in Hell's heavily supplied arsenal. Anytime this robotic beast rears his ugly head, the player knows they have their work cut out for them. Because the CYBERDEMON serves as the game's final boss, you'd expect this is going to be the toughest iteration of the rocket-launching Minotaur yet. As soon as the Marine enters the Hellmouth room, he passes through what seems to be a tall corridor. As he looks up, he realizes he's walking under the CYBERDEMON's legs, indicating the ogre's towering size. With this introduction, the player imagines they're in for the fight of their life, especially since CD is immune to standard attacks, including the BFG. Instead, all the Marine really needs to do is merry-go-round the arena while waiting for the Soul Cube to charge. Although the battleground is littered with demons, they can be disposed of with the most basic weaponry. After tossing the cube at the CYBERDEMON a few times, he'll be cast back into hell. Even though Doom 3 was admittedly a polarizing title for a lot of people, very few, if any, want to defend this boss. Number 5. Apocalypse, X-Men vs Street Fighter. During the 1990s, Capcom had massive success with their fighting titles, including X-Men Children of the Atom, Marvel superheroes, and of course, Street Fighter. With fans craving for more, Capcom's next course of action was the crossover, X-Men vs Street Fighter. Everything was bigger in this 2-on-2 fighter, including the roster, the combos, and the special moves. And of course, the main campaign concludes with a battle against the X-Men's most powerful foe, Apocalypse. As soon as this monstrous mutant appears, he looks pretty intimidating. Suddenly, he grows in immense size, filling the entire screen. Because of Apocalypse's awesome introduction, the player assumes he'll be a nightmare to face. On the contrary, he's a total pushover. His central attack is slamming his gigantic fist into the ground, which creates a shockwave. But if you get behind his hand, this move can't harm you. Even though his drill hand can shred your health bar to pieces in a matter of seconds, he telegraphs it for a full 3 seconds, giving you plenty of time to evade it. After memorizing his simple patterns, Apocalypse is arguably the easiest opponent in the game. Number 4. RAFE ADLER, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Being the final installment, Naughty Dog worked on Uncharted 4's epilogue early in development to ensure the franchise went out on a high. For the most part, the team succeeded. It's a wonderful end, and it gives Nathan Drake the perfect send-off. That's why it's ironic how Uncharted 4 dropped the ball with the final boss. Because Nate has known the main villain, RAFE ADLER, for 15 years, and the pair started off as allies, they have major beef with one another, which should give this finale some palpable pathos. Instead, the iconic Naughty Dog tetralogy concludes with what is basically a quick-time sword fight. Although QTE gameplay can work, it's utilized poorly here. During this sequence, it's never explained Nate can attack whenever he wants, giving the player the erroneous belief they can only perform actions when the command pops up, as is tradition in a QTE section. So not only is this encounter gimmicky, the gameplay here is unclear. Also, introducing a new mechanic during the emotional climax of a narrative-heavy game is silly. And yeah, we're not really counting the flashback as using it before. The rest of Uncharted 4's ending is so perfect, this shoddy boss really stands out. Number 3. The Ancient Wyvern, Dark Souls 3. Since Dark Souls 3 boasts 25 bosses, not all of them are going to stand out. Having said that, even bad bosses like Wolnir and Vort aren't without merit, since they look pretty daunting and have some imaginative mechanics. Ironically, the most disappointing boss also happens to be the coolest looking one, the Ancient Wyvern. Hacking at the winged serpent is pointless since it's immune to all standard attacks. Instead, our nameless knight must make their way through multiple traps and enemies before plunging their blade into the colossal dragon's weak point. How many times does this action have to be performed? Once! One little stab and the Ancient Wyvern is no more. Now, taking down bosses with one shot can work in certain games. Mysterio in Spider-Man 2 and the Electrocutioner in Batman Arkham City are two obvious examples. But this is Dark Souls we're talking about. It's a series that's redefined torture. Having a boss that can be eliminated with a single blow goes against everything the Soulsborne games stand for. The fact the developers implemented the insta-kill mechanic with the most intimidating looking boss makes it all the more frustrating. Number 2. Liquid Ocelot, Metal Gear Solid 4. The presentation for Metal Gear Solid 4's primary villain, Liquid Ocelot, is top-notch. The confrontation preludes with a masterful 8-minute sequence, with Liquid detailing his intentions to his brother, Solid Snake, before the two batter each other senseless in a magnificent pre-rendered sequence. Throughout this scuffle, the boss music from each Metal Gear Solid game is played, giving the climax even more weight. Also, having Snake titled as Naked Snake during the third phase is a nice touch. Because all these emotional moments hit their mark, it's easy to forget the showdown itself is pretty naff. Instead of relying on the skills accumulated throughout the series, these two superpowered assassins duke it out in a rudimentary fistfight. No stealth, no gadgets, no clever mechanics, instead the game turns into a beat 'em up. Even though there are 4 phases to this brawl, there's no differentiation in attacks, combos, or grapples. It is commendable how Hideo Kojima wanted this game to culminate with a stripped-down physical battle to focus on the emotional rivalry between the two characters. Nevertheless, players expected this story arc would end with something better than 2 old guys punching each other for 5 minutes. Number 1. TYREEN the Destroyer, Borderlands 3. The Destroyer from the first Borderlands is widely considered to be one of the worst boss fights in gaming history. In a way, this criticism worked out for the series, since it incentivized Gearbox not to make the same mistake for the sequel. Lo and behold, the developers went above and beyond to ensure Borderlands 2 had one of the greatest, funniest, charismatic, and entertaining antagonists of all time in Handsome Jack. So what did Gearbox decide to do with the final boss of Borderlands 3? They decided to make the player face another Destroyer. What's more baffling is this version, TYREEN, is worse than the original Destroyer. Her attacks are so easy to dodge, the player shouldn't have any trouble defeating her whatsoever. Not only is this an easy fight, it's bewilderingly short, 2 minutes tops. Because of its brevity, most first-time players think this anticlimactic confrontation is merely the first phase of a bigger battle. But no, once her health bar is depleted, she's done for. Because Gearbox created the blueprint for a perfect antagonist, it doesn't make sense why they concluded Borderlands 3 with a recreation of the franchise's most hated boss. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other incredible looking bosses who unfortunately sucked to fight. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.